Today is the 28th of Sivan, the power of Sivan, when in 1941 the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to America, changing America, changing the world, and opening up opportunities, spiritual opportunities for all of us. Please subscribe and share. Sorry, this is worth recording. The things that don't look good are also part of his script. And I definitely sometimes forget that, and have to remind myself when something's happening in my life that no, this is him. This is his new, better plan. That's the line I tell myself. This is his new, better plan. So go with it and know it's his new, better plan. So Rivka got to see it in the flesh. New, better plan in the flesh. All right, let's say our blessing.
I remember Orly was telling the same story. Orly.
Right. So you heard Orly's story before yours happened or as yours was happening as well?
I didn't realize, but it was happening for me at the same time. But I didn't
connect it.
I was in the middle of it.
Right. You were in the middle of the story, so you didn't see that this was the new, better plan.
Right.
But then how long did it take from when they fired you till you got rehired at a higher salary for better bosses?
I had uninterrupted employment. So
oh, wow.
They hired me right away and I didn't have very good attitude, like whatever. But then they proved it. They were very patient and they proved me over and over again that they're professionals and they were treating us very well. Yeah.
But we should all merit not just to see it, but to see it like Rivka saw it, like right away.
Yeah.
Right away. When we get the news that doesn't seem like this is God's better plan for us, it should happen so fast that we shouldn't be, hanging in limbo, waiting to see the better plan unfold. It should be so clear this is God's better plan. This is God's better plan. Just like Rivka. And you're right. Yes, Orly went through that as well. All right. So let's say our blessing. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Ha'olam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Toraso Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So I'm going to piggyback from what we're talking about with Rivka to segue to tonight, because what we were saying, I don't remember exactly how we got onto it, but that Rivka had this beautiful story, and she's right, or at least shared with us hers as well, how both of them in a job-related field, slightly different window dressing for the story, but both of them getting fired, and then each one actually seeing how that was good, that was God's kindness, and Orly opening up a better profession, and Rivka's actually continuing the same job, the same profession, just now working for the outsourced company at an even better salary and with better treatment. And that concept really, that it's so clear, that it's so obvious, I think has to do with today's date that's very special. And as I wrote, I wanted to focus on the date today and to pick up what we've been discussing next week, probably. That on today's date, in the Hebrew calendar, the 28th of Sivan, which 28 is the Hebrew word koch, the strength of Sivan. And Sivan's a very powerful month because it's the month of the giving of the Torah. So this is the strength of the giving of the Torah. There was a shift in the spirituality of America, a ripple to a shift in the spirituality of the entire world. And that shift opened up the possibility, as an Orly story, as a Rivka story, that it becomes so obvious sometimes it's so clear. God's hand, God's good hand, kind hand, beneficent hand. And we see it more and more and more and more in so many aspects of our life. And it didn't used to be this way. It didn't used to be that it was so obvious, that it was so clear, God's kindness in all the details. Not that it wasn't, it was, but there were more blockages obstructing God's energy from freely being expressed in this world. And especially there were blockages in the Americas, in North and South America, which we happened to discuss last week in this class, connects to what we're learning. So hopefully people remember that North and South America was the place where people came and lost their Judaism. And it's like a little, it's like a little weird. I mean, people knew that happened, and people were like, yeah, because the way you make money is by working in the sweatshops, and if you don't show up on Saturday, you lost your job on Sunday, no job to come back to. So inevitably, to survive, people need to work Saturday, and once you stop keeping Shabbos, well, everything else is going to fall apart. So that's the line we say, but it doesn't really make that much sense, because we've been through far worse for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. We've been in exile over 1900 years, and when we were in Israel, there were also tremendous persecutions and suffering on our survival and our Jewish survival. So suddenly, these Jews who for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years were persecuted in so many ways, and yet still stayed strong and stayed connected to God, suddenly they come to America and they just lose everything. The Rebbe explained that the reason that happened is because America was that half a world where Torah was not given. As we explained last week at length, so hopefully you remember, that we're viewing the high point of the world, the spiritual high point of the world, because the world is a ball, a globe, a circle, it's rotating in space. Any point could be the top. So arbitrarily picking North America, South Pole, North Pole, the Rebbe says spiritually we place Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. That's the high point of the world. That's where God came down. God came down to the mountain. God revealed himself to humans as never before and never since. Until the complete revelation of Mashiach, the world has never experienced such exposure of God as happened on Mount Sinai. So that's the highest point of the world, which makes Europe, Africa, and Asia the northern hemisphere, the upper half of the world, the half where Torah was given. And the Americas, North America and South America, the bottom, the half where Torah wasn't given. And because they're on the bottom, that's why there was such a blockage to Torah, such a blockage to serving God, an intense, thick barrier that was so thick, that was so intense, that people came to America and lost their Judaism. Now, there were exceptions. So how did those exceptions survive when you couldn't, when you lose your job Sunday, if you didn't show up to work Saturday? They became peddlers. They became craftsmen. They became painters, cobblers. A Jew's always going to find a way. But how come the masses of Jews that left Europe Orthodox and came to America and lost it, how come they didn't all become peddlers and craftsmen and open little shops and push carts? And because they were dealing with a very thick, thick, thick darkness. This thick, thick darkness that clogged up their psyche, which was this is a half of the world where Torah was not given. And in 1940 and 41, everything changed. Because in 1940, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe came to America on the 9th of Adar. That was Adar 2, was a leap year. And a year later, 1941, on today, the 28th of Sivan, the Rebbe came to America. It's very interesting, actually. The Rebbe writes this. It was in honor of the 28th of Sivan in 1991, commemorating the date 50 years later. So the president at that time in America, President Bush, wrote a letter to the Rebbe congratulating him on 50 years in America. And the Rebbe wrote back a letter to President Bush. And in the letter, he points out something very interesting, that the same year he came to America, in 1941, around actually that same time, Congress passed a law strengthening July 4th. Now, July 4th became a public holiday in 1870, but it wasn't a paid federal holiday, so people were still working. But in 1941, not coincidentally, as the Rebbe himself is pointing out, in 1941, and the Rebbe came to America about a week before July 4th, Congress passes a law saying we're making July 4th a paid federal holiday. So actually people aren't going to be working on July 4th. Of course, once the federal workers are off, this, trickle down until most people, besides in certain fields, are of course unpaid leave of absence on July 4th. So the Rebbe says this is tremendously strengthening the holiday of July 4th. Now, what's the holiday of July 4th? The holiday of America, Independence Day, the symbol of patriotism. So it's very interesting. Not only is it an interesting fact, but it's interesting that the Rebbe himself is pointing this out to the President of America, to George Bush, that linked to the energy of the Rebbe coming to America is a strengthening of the symbol of America, of the symbol of patriotism, strengthening July 4th. And it's really, as we understand it spiritually, with the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe coming to America, it's as if, so to speak, the divine presence came to America. Because the Rebbe is actually an acronym, which means in English, head of the Jewish people. How you get that from the word Rebbe is because in Hebrew, Rebbe is 3 letters, and the 3 letters stand for 3 Hebrew words, Rosh B'nai Yisrael, which means the head of the Jewish people. So containing all the energy. So a Rebbe contains within his soul a spark of every single Jew of his generation. So in one person, in the Rebbe, we have contained in miniature the energy of the Jewish people. And the energy of the Jewish people is the energy of God's divine presence. God's divine presence is called his Shekhinah. If you've ever heard that term, that's the divine presence of God. And Shekhinah is the repository of the Jewish souls. That's why in the temple, you could have all the Jews there. And that's what brought down God's presence, because the Shekhinah, all the Jews are there, so God is elicited. Or you could have one person, the Rebbe, who contains all the Jewish souls, and therefore is eliciting God's presence, is embodying the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So here we have in 1940 and 41, the Shekhinah, the embodiment of God's divine energy, because contained in one person that's containing all the sparks of all the Jews, is coming to that lower portion of the world, that portion of the world blocked from spirituality, as I think I mentioned last week, that when the previous Observant Rebbe came in 1940, escaped the Warsaw Ghetto through divine intervention that played out with American intervention and German intervention, and non-Jew whose father was Jewish, actually being the one from the German army that got him out of the Warsaw Ghetto and ultimately to a boat in Latvia from which he came to America. So when he came that first day, and here he's this hero, he's the hero that survived the Soviets and now escaped Hitler. So he was treated with tremendous honor, and he spoke very strongly. America is not different. And until then, of course, America was different. America is not different. Judaism is going to flourish in America. And he writes that night, someone that was very close to the Rebbe said, Rebbe, hairs will grow on the palm of your hand before Judaism flourishes in America. That was a perspective. And this was said by a devout person and by a friend and by someone that was religious. And he's like, America is different. And the previous Observant Rebbe said, America is not different. And he changed it that America became not different because he came. And a year later, the Rebbe came. And that's moving, again, God's core energy to America. So when God's core energy is in America, America is not different. Now it actually becomes the source from where godliness is spreading to the entire world. And therefore, it's really an amazing spiritual day. Such a spiritual day that I said, we really need to do something to mark the day. And it's not just, okay, we're in America, so we can appreciate it. But the Rebbe explains that it's like if you have a building and you would want to raise the building, you take a lever and you put it underneath the foundation and you raise it. With that lever, you raise the bottom of the building. And as you're raising the basement, the foundation, obviously you don't just happen to pick up the foundation, pick up the basement, the entire structure is being lifted up. So it's not only a day that's relevant to us in America, though of course you could say it's primarily relevant to us in America, but that's not even true. It's relevant to the entire world. Just as we know on a physical level, whatever happens in America ripples through the whole world. So whatever happening spiritually in America is uplifting the entire world. And therefore, this is a day significant to the entire world, spiritually significant to the entire world. So I really wanted to focus on that. And it happens to be that what I'm saying very much is in sync with what we're learning. So a lot of what I'm saying hopefully sounds familiar and sounds like ideas we've discussed. But today is really the day. The 28th of Sivan is when it happened. So how do you see, have you seen this? Can you digest this in your own life, that the source of spiritual energy is in America and not, for example, in Israel? Any thoughts on that?
Are you saying that this is true today also?
Absolutely. It's true today. It's true every day since the 28th of Sivan, 1941, which was like sometimes, I think something like, I don't remember, June 20 something in 1941. I think it was like actually June 28th in 1941, if I'm not mistaken. So that's when the energy shifted, because the Rebbe came to America. And a year prior, his father-in-law, the Rebbe, then came to America and had been here ever since. So until today, and continuing until the complete revelation of the redemption, the source of spiritual energy, the Rebbe, is in America. So it's been true ever since. But we celebrate dates because we're told, there's a verse that says, it's a verse actually from Megillah Esther, which means that on a spiritual date, the energy reoccurs annually. So that shift in energy that happened on the 28th of Sivan, every year is reinvigorated on the 28th of Sivan. So that's why we're speaking about this today as versus in a week from now or a week ago. It has to do with today's energy, because today's energy is when it happened, and therefore when it is being renewed. Energy is being renewed. So can anyone has seen this, can digest this in their mind, that America has a bigger impact on the world spiritually than Israel or a place like that? Or I can't even think of an example, a competition maybe would think besides Israel. So that's why I'm saying Israel. Well, let me phrase the question differently. How did coming to America impact your spiritual journey? I mean, for most of you, when you left Russia, there was religious freedom in Russia. The same way there was freedom for you to leave, there was also religious freedom in Russia. So do you see that your spiritual journey is different because you came to America? Or do you think if you were in Russia, you would probably be spiritually in about the same place?
Absolutely different. Not even word to say. Of course, different. It's Miriam.
Yeah, I know, Miriam. Why? Why wouldn't you have become closer to God in Russia if there was spiritual freedom in Russia at that point when you guys left?
Well, it wasn't spiritual freedom when I left. I left in 89. It wasn't spiritual freedom.
Mm-hmm. But you got out.
Well, thank God I did. And as soon as I came, first thing I did, I went to, well, many people went, not just me, went to shul. And that's where my story began.
So
And
Fega was telling us last week, Fega, you were telling us, right? How when you went to Italy, you went to the shul?
Yeah.
Fega was saying that, and someone else was saying that. Who was saying they went to shul and got kicked out till they went to Chabad? Fega, was that you?
Yeah, but it was not Chabad. It was definitely not Chabad.
Right, because you said they kicked you out.
Yeah, they not kicked me out. It was just security, and they didn't let us get in. It was
Let
just
you in, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
we said, maybe our English was not that good, or who knows why.
They didn't let you in, right? I remember you saying that. So it was interesting because when we asked on the call I think it was last week, we were discussing this, and not too many people had that like they come to Italy, they have freedom, they're going to go to a synagogue. But Miriam, you came to California and you went to a synagogue?
I just one second. No, I came to New Jersey.
New Jersey, okay.
And I came to synagogue, and many people like us during this time went to the same shul, and it was Chabad shul. And from that day, we started coming on, not on the holidays. It was just not like every, but from there was one time it was like a call who wants to have a name, and Jewish name, and my daughter, who was born back in Soviet Union, but my grandmother was named Basia, and I always kept my mind that her name is, I didn't call her Basia in town where I lived in Soviet Union, but when I came here, and there, as soon as I heard, it was literally like maybe first year of our being in the United States, there was a call from a rabbi's wife who wants to have naming. And I said, yes, that's exactly as I always kept it. And that was first thing, actually big deal for me, was when I named her in shul as Basia, and I named myself as Miriam. And since then,
nice.
Yeah, it was the beginning. It was a long way, little by little. But I felt, even in the Soviet Union, when I went very rarely to a synagogue, but when I did with my parents during high holidays, for some reason, I was always like very tearful. And maybe I could count on my fingers how many times, 4 times maximum, 5 I went to shul on the high holidays. But in being in the United States, as soon as I get to the shul, I start crying. I'm not doing it visual, just like close my. I used to wear dark glasses that nobody would see me that I am crying, and I could not do it for the longest time. I could not stop. It reminded me. First, many people spoke Yiddish, and it reminded me atmosphere in my household, my grandmother, and things which she would say. And here I'm hearing this alive. So it was all very touching, extremely touching. I would think, I'm going to go back cry. Like, am I going to cry? No, and it took a long time. I don't know, number of years until I stopped crying when I go to shul.
So do you think, this is my question, do you think if you stayed in Russia, and Russia did and does have religious freedom, you would have progressed the same way you progressed here? Or do you think here you're closer? That's my question.
I do not know.
Okay.
For me, here being here in the United States and seeing big synagogues in Dnipropetrovsk, for me, I know it's true, but it's very hard to digest. I can't believe there are still Jews there in such anti-Semitic states. I honestly do not believe it. It's all real. I feel like it's foolish shtick, if you know what it means. I don't know. I shouldn't say it this way, but for some reason it's something else. I do not know. And I don't know what would happen.
Someone else question. How did coming to America impact your personal spiritual journey? We heard from Miriam. Who else would like to voice in on that? How did coming to America impact your spiritual journey? Rachel?
For me, it just happened naturally, like it just was happening. It actually started in Italy. Our first Seder, we were over Passover, we were still in Italy, and we had a Seder. And I tried to listen and do everything right. But then what you said reminded me of the things that I heard from people. that people who came to Israel had fewer chances to become religious, to become observant than people who came to America. And I was always wondering why it was like that. But now you said that this is how it is. The center is here. But I don't know why.
That's the truth. So if you had stayed in Russia when Russia opened up, when did you leave Russia? What year?
89.
Oh, so you both left 89. Okay, so was there religious freedom in 89 in Russia?
I didn't know about it
You didn't know.
in
No.
89. But like 3 or 4 years ago, we were back in Ukraine to visit.
Right.
And it was so different. Synagogues, kosher restaurants, just like a different country.
So you're saying you don't know. Maybe you would have shifted.
Maybe,
Heart
yeah,
and soul.
because what I saw now, like 3 years ago, I can imagine that maybe I would become their religious.
Right. It's hard to know. It's a hard question. So I do feel like you said that there's a certain core spiritual energy here, because the Rebbe is here, because Rebbe Yatz came here, because the Rebbe came here, that shifted the core of spiritual energy to America, which could be why there's a certain openness and movement to God, specifically in America. And again, I don't know the numbers, so I don't know the percentages, for example, of Russian Jews that left Russia. What percentage of them have a connection to God that are living in America, and what percentage have a connection to God that are living in Israel, and what percentage have a connection to God that are living in Russia. I don't know those numbers, so I can't vouch for it. I don't know if you have any sense of it, where you see more, your friends became more religious. I have no clue. And I guess everyone's perspective would be very non-scientific and very, very subjective. But there definitely is a power and therefore an ability to come close to God, specifically in America. There is a power here. And as Rachel was saying, that now we do have, I think that they say, like, in one of the cities in Ukraine is like the largest synagogue, like it's a synagogue and a banquet hall and a restaurant and a school and everything.
Dnipropetrovsk.
Okay, so it's like, wow, you know how things have turned around. So obviously there are people, they're going to that synagogue, a lot of them, this huge synagogue, and yet somehow there's a certain openness here, an ability here to connect to God that's really exclusive to America. Does that resonate with anybody else in terms of their own personal journey, how this American style openness, ability to connect to God, that they felt that flavored their personal journey?
Hi, Cyril.
Hi, Chava.
I'm not going to answer your question. I just want to give a comment. So I actually know two people, totally independent people who became religious in Russia, like nowadays, right? And one of them is actually my friend who lives in a deep, whatever, Russia, Ural, whatever, no synagogue, no kosher food, nothing in that town. And she became religious just from her own soul. She has almost no access to anything in that town, and she became religious. And that, to me, is amazing, a miracle story that
Strength of the
no
Jewish soul.
explanation. Yeah. And I know another, she's about my age.
Were you friends with her before she became religious, and she hadn't become religious, or did you connect when she was on her journey?
No. I knew her from college times, right? So there was no religion, nothing even close, right? We were all, let's say, ignorant, right? And after I left for America, we weren't in touch for a number of years. She moved to that Ural or whatever, like real north of Russia. And we kind of lost touch. But I kept in touch with our mutual friend who lives in Germany. And this friend from Germany told me, oh, by the way, do you know that this person also became religious and maybe like you want to reconnect? And we reconnected, and since then we keep in touch. And I know other people who, like a younger generation, more closer to our children's generation, who became religious in Russia. And unfortunately, I know too many Russian men in America who not just didn't become religious, but actually married to non-Jews. And when I look at all this data, we, like me and Rochel and Rivka and Miriam, we're here because we're on this journey, right? So it's important for us. And we look around and we know another 5 people who became religious. But unfortunately, all of us know hundreds, whatever, people who didn't become spiritual here, right? So we are very few. So if we're talking about numbers, I know a few people who became religious in Israel. So I'm just trying to say
I hear what you're
objectively.
saying. You're saying some became religious in America and the majority didn't. Some became religious in Israel and the majority didn't. And some became religious in Russia and the majority didn't.
Which in Russia is, to me,
The greatest miracle.
The greatest miracle. The greatest miracle that people became religious in Russia.
Right.
The same people like
is
me.
Probably still very strong there.
Yeah, and I'm talking about people the same like me who were as ignorant as I was, right? And whatever happened to the neshama, that they chose this route. So,
well, I think what you're saying is true. I mean, for world Jewry, that obviously in this very unusual situation we're in now at this point in our history, that the majority of the Jews of the world don't have an obvious connection to God that they're aware of. Now, obviously, your friend in the Ural is a perfect example of the power of a Jewish soul overcoming everything. And sometimes when there's the greatest darkness, that's what ignites the light. And there's a sense of suffocation that just bursts forth and something comes out. And then thank God for like World Wide Web and means of connection like that. But it's very, because we've grown up with it, we sort of think that the norm is for Jewish people to not be connected to God. And that's not the norm. And if that was the norm, there wouldn't be any Jews around today. And in all of our history, until you get to like Moses Mendelssohn, which was, some, 300 plus years ago, there wasn't the concept of a Jew who was a Jew but didn't act like a Jew and didn't eat like a Jew and didn't live like a Jew and didn't dress like a Jew. That concept didn't exist. You were a Jew or you just lost it completely and assimilated and became like a non-Jew. And those people, we don't know who their descendants are today, even though, of course, spiritually still stay Jewish. And of course, definitely when we have the complete revelation of Mashiach, there will be tens of thousands, no question, tens of thousands, probably more than that, of non-Jews that find out they're actually Jewish. because their mother's mother was a Jew who somehow got lost among the nations. But for world Jewry, there was no concept of being Jewish but not eating Jewish and dressing Jewish and talking Jewish. Didn't exist. You were a Jew, which meant a religious Jew, or you weren't a Jew at all. And only in the last, very recent from a historical perspective, hundreds of years, has there been this concept of being a Jew who doesn't act like a Jew and talk like a Jew and eat like a Jew and dress like a Jew and pray like a Jew. That's a very recent shift. And it has become a worldwide phenomenon. And again, statistically, there's about 15 million Jews, probably far more. And statistically, we'd say about 3 million are on some level Orthodox, on some level have a relationship with God in a Orthodox Jewish way. Firma, do you have a question?
Yeah, just something that I thought was interesting. Like, I think in the secular world, if you say to somebody like, oh, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious, like they also are like, oh, you're not Jewish. Because like in their world, like you're either a Christian, like, you know, like really go to church and all these things, or you're not really. Like there's kind of also this like, you know, you're like, you were raised Christian, but you're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like they don't understand that like in between, like weird sensation. It's funny that, cause like you were talking about that. I think that it's
they don't understand it because you're right. They don't have a parallel in their world because a non-practicing Christian isn't really Christian. But a non-practicing Jew is always a Jew.
Yeah.
So you're right. And you never can take the Jew out of the Jew. And if we would try to, the world wouldn't let us anyway. But you're absolutely right about that. But even in the world today, and I agree with Chava, and I'm saying statistically, of course, that's 100% true. There's no question about that the majority of the world is not overtly religious. But the world has shifted a lot in these past years, in the past 60 some years under the Rebbe's leadership. The world really has shifted a lot. And that's really something the Rebbe has done really in a worldwide way, reminding Jews that they're Jewish. That's definitely, I would say, an incredible point of the Rebbe's leadership is reminding world Jewry, religious, 100% religious, partially religious, marginally religious, not religious, but remembering you're a Jew, remembering there's a God, and remembering that a Jew always has this deep connection to God. And that's definitely a credit to what the Rebbe has accomplished. But I definitely hear what Chava's saying, and based on that, you know, even though it seems so difficult to imagine people becoming religious in Russia, of all places, where there seems so much blockage, but they have, and maybe some of you who are in Russia, you would be those people, because obviously your soul found it in America, and for most of your friends, their souls didn't find it yet. So maybe also in Russia, your soul would have found it, even if for most of your friends, your souls didn't find it. But there is something special about being in America, and that really has to do with the Rebbe being here, and the Rebbe as this embodiment of this spiritual energy. But I do agree with what Rachel said before about Israel and looking at the Jews in Israel, and even though Chava was saying correctly that there are some Jews that came from Russia to Israel and did become religious, and of course there are. But unfortunately, it seems for far more it didn't go in that direction. It would be, well, why would it go that way in Israel of all places? And Israel is such a holy place. And if you're there, you can so feel that energy and it's so palpable. But yet in America, we have something more. In America, we have the Rebbe here. And the Rebbe, again, containing all the energy, the core energy of the souls of every single Jew of this generation, is containing the spiritual presence that we call the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And that magnet is drawing God like down into Brooklyn, down into 770, down into America. And again, from here the light spreads forth to the whole world, affecting the whole world, which is why we see on a physical plane how America affects the whole world, as America spiritually is now affecting the whole world. And the Rebbe is causing America to be lifted up, which means causing the whole world to be lifted up. Because America's on the bottom and she's going up, well, the whole structure higher than her is going up. So how do you see this concept of the Rebbe as the embodiment of the spiritual energy? Does that make sense in your brains? Do you see that as something that resonates? Envisioning a human, a leader of Jewry, as embodying the special spiritual energy, the special like magnet of God's presence. From
Yeah, so I actually have like this weird thing. So when I went to Israel, I wasn't so observant, so I didn't have like that. I was so fascinated by Israel, but I don't think I ever had that like aha moment and like cried when I went like to 770 the first time. Like there was just like this different level for me personally, which is kind of sad. I cry about that all the time. I'm like, why couldn't I really like tap into my spirituality more when I was in Israel?
How long were you in Israel for?
Only 10 days.
So you were in Israel for 10 days and you didn't feel it, and when you went to 770 you did feel it?
Well, I think it was different. I think I was trying to block it off in a weird way. Like I think I was in a weird state of mind when I went to Israel, so it was like a different situation. But the first time I went to 770, I was younger and like I was, you know, in a different lifestyle. So I think I really like when I went there, it just was like a different feeling and everything. I think I also have a stronger connection to the Rebbe, but when I went to Israel, I think it was like I did feel spirituality and like I thought it was really cool, the history and everything, but I didn't really, I think, tap into it as much as I think I could now.
You're saying you didn't identify with it personally, it was more like abstract.
Yeah. But then my other note is also I kind of have this hard time, like I understand that the Rebbe really did and is affecting the world, but to me I feel like the world's so disgusting. I feel like it's even worse than it was back in the day. Like there's this gross klipa. Like you see like nowadays, if you were to go on the train, you see people that are like, I don't even want to open my eyes. You know what I mean? Like it's disgusting. So in a way it's like so hard to picture that we're on such a high spiritual plane when everything around you is like the worst type of klipa that you can think of.
I relate to both of your points. I want to open them up to other people. So Froma said two things, and both I think were very relevant. So the first thing Froma said was that when she was in Israel, not really kind of in an inner level feeling the holiness, like sort of aware it was there, but a little detached from it. And then she said when she went to 770, like feeling it so intently. So I know Fega spoke last week about going to 770 and feeling the energy there. I don't know if anyone here would comment on either direction. If when you were in Israel feeling it, if you were in 770, if you had that opportunity, how you felt there, did you feel it? Didn't you feel it? Or when you were in Israel, did you feel it? Did you not feel it? I mean, it's definitely in Israel. I think it's more in 770, but there definitely is a lot of powerful energy in Israel. So anyone here had either of, or both of those experiences and could talk about them, chime in on what they felt. From a shared hers, which was her very personal, you know, again, no scientific study here, just her personal soul orientation, how she related to both of those places. And as she said, had a lot to do with probably her personal space in both of those places, her personal history. Hava?
Yeah, I would say it's probably very to personal space. I've been to Israel many times, and like my first few visits to Israel were very, let's say, secular, right? And I liked it. I love the Israel, but not like from spiritual point of view, from all other points of view. And on one of my later visits to Israel, especially I was in Jerusalem and I was in Tzfat. But it's not first time. I've been to Jerusalem before and was in Tzfat before. But I remember very strongly once I was on Shabbos day, I was walking in Jerusalem and I felt like almost like smell a different air. Like it was, I don't know, it was like a aha moment for me. Like it just was like felt completely different atmosphere in Jerusalem on Shabbos day. Like I remember it very vividly. That like
Were you already on your journey when that happened, or was
Yes.
it before you were?
Yes, it was. I was already on my journey. I don't remember where I was, but definitely I already was learning. Already had some understanding, so it didn't come totally like maybe I was looking for something. Maybe I was open to experience that. But I remember just like
Feeling
just happened, just that feeling came to me in Jerusalem.
Wow. Anyone else had that in Israel, how they experienced it, or were in 770, how they experienced it? Rachel?
I think a lot depends on who you spend time with in Israel. First 2 times when we came to Israel, we were spending time with secular relatives. It was like, okay, relatives. Like first time we came to their house, they put everything on the table, including food that we already didn't eat. We already started something. But the third time, I already had a religious relative there. My niece grew and
I remember
became
you told us.
Yeah. So it was a completely different experience. So it depends on what people you spend
Makes
time
perfect
with.
sense. I mean, I think what Fruma and Chava are saying is matches your message, links in. They're saying it depends a lot on your space. Like Fruma said, she wasn't in a space. It was there, but she was very detached from it. And Chava said, my first few times I wasn't in the space. I didn't pick it up. I don't know what she would have felt if she was in Jerusalem or Tzfat Shabbos. Then maybe she would have anyway, maybe she wouldn't have. But when she was already opened herself and then she was there, it was like, whoa, she felt something. And you're saying, which I think is a complete complementary concept, you know, when you're with certain people, it's a little more blockage. And when we're with other people, you can smell the flowers, you know, you can see the sights, the beauty that was there, but was just unnoticed. Beaches, cafes, you know, nightlife, it just wasn't, it's not the same world. And wherever there is, which a little bit is sort of relates to the second half of Fruma's question, but spirituality always is this pendulum effect, which means wherever there's more potential holiness, there can be more potential evil. That creates, of course, the concept of free choice. So the smaller, the more narrow is that movement in the positive, it's also going to be more narrow in the negative. It's going to be like, as we say in Yiddish, verquetscht, like small. And when it's big and huge in the positive, it's big and huge in the negative, which could be why, unfortunately, going back to what we were saying before about Jews becoming more Jewish in America versus in Russia versus in Israel. And Rachel said, well, you think in Israel would be the most. And unfortunately, there could be the most virulent anti-religious, anti-God, anti-spiritual sentiment, specifically in Israel, where there's the most holiness. And that's so bizarre, and that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Because there's so much spirituality, and everything has to be balanced. Which again, sort of goes into from a second half of her question, but I'll get to it. I didn't forget it. Anyone else had their experience in 770 or in Israel that they'd like to share?
Yes. Hello. When I was in Israel twice, I remember I was completely secular, and being in Tzfat, I remember that feeling. It was very, very special. The energy was special. And being in all the synagogues, I didn't know much about Kabbalah, Ari, and other famous Rebbes, but just being there, I felt that energy. And like being on the topic, I think more Jews are, even I just checked the percentage, more religious Jews are, observant Jews are in Israel than in America.
Percentage-wise.
Yes, percentage-wise, I just Googled and
Great.
checked. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Google.
Yeah, in America, there are more like opportunities to get intermarried, more than in Israel.
Sure.
And yeah. And like in my family, there are a few people who became very religious in the same family, like father and son, and mother and sister, like the daughter. They're not religious. Interesting. And there's a site, Talmud.ru, like so many Russian Jews made Baal Tshuva, and there's so many rabbis, you know. So that's
in Israel.
In Israel, that's my experience.
That's so nice.
And here I see so many, especially American Jews, completely anti-religious. But that's my view, and that's my experience.
Right. Well, that's what we're talking about, our experience. So it's nice what Menucha was saying, how when she went to Israel and knowing very little, she felt the spirituality in Tzfat. So in Israel, we're told there are 4 holy cities. You said you felt in Tzfat, and Chav also said Tzfat and Jerusalem. So the 4 holiest cities in Israel are Tzfat, Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Hebron. And they relate to the 4 elements. The world was constructed with 4 spiritual elements, which are parallel to 4 physical elements, the spiritual elements of fire, earth, wind, and water, which are we have them in our godly soul, fire, earth, wind, and water. We have in our animal soul, fire, earth, wind, and water. There's the most foundational building blocks, solid, liquid, gas, and the energy that moves them from one state to another. In the ancient instruments like tambourines, they have 4 strokes that represent your fire, earth, wind, and water. So let me see if I remember. Well, air, I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to remember which was which. I know Tiberias is water. Pretty sure Tzfat is air, is wind. And I think Jerusalem would be fire and Hebron is earth. I think those are the 4. And it's interesting really because Hebron, of course, it's so palpable. It's like you feel it, like, oh my gosh, you know, it's like it's a very palpable energy. And Jerusalem, of course, it's a city, but definitely it's also, you know, you can feel a lot. I would think of the 4 in a sense. Tzfat, you feel it the most, I guess, because it's air. So it has like definitely that very, very, very tangible, physical, spiritual experience. It's like interwoven, it's a synergy that the physical just feels the spiritual. And Tiberias is so interesting because of the 4, it's the most secular city. It seems like a very secular Israeli city, and yet sprinkled among that secular Israeli city is some of the holiest spots in all of Israel. And it is literally one of the 4 holiest, it's the top 4 holiest cities in Israel is Tiberias. So it's nice what Menucha is saying, that there are many, many Russians that are in Israel and have returned and served God, and rabbis and common men, and you know, and we should see it. You know, we should see it more and more and more. And again, I do believe, like in everything, we're shown what we're supposed to be shown. So sometimes people have to have the experience where they see people far, and that helps them return. Sometimes people see people close, and that ignites their spark to return. And sometimes God gives you both opportunities. In different spaces, you need different things, which sort of, again, goes to Frumma's question, the second half of her question. The first half was a question. She was sharing her personal experience. And I can definitely say for myself, I lived in Israel for about 2 years. I lived for a year. I went away for summer. I lived for another year when I was in school there. And then probably like, I can't think how many, maybe 10 plus years later, I returned for a week. And then like 20 years after that, I was there for like another week. It's very, very palpable to me, the spirituality in Israel. I can feel it with my fingers. Very, very strong. Very strong. No question. And I feel it in the people in Israel. I feel it even in the very common, simple people in Israel. I feel the perfume of living in Israel. It's very strong to me. A friend of mine, of course, had passed away. For those who know Liba Bunin, I remember her saying after she was in Israel for a few weeks, when she went back on the plane, her stopover, which happened to be in Germany, but I don't think that was really the point. She said when she walked out of the plane, she just looked at the people, she felt like these are walking dead, like you're alive in Israel. So there's definitely a very strong, if you're tapped into it, current, which I agree with you. People can live there their whole lives and never realize it. It's very, very strong there. At the same time, I would say definitely, both for myself and philosophically, I would say stronger than all that is 770, because it's not only, I would say to me stronger than that, but I would also say across the board stronger than that, because as the Rebbe explains, 770 truly contains the energy of the temple in exile, from when the temple was destroyed some 1900 years ago. As it says in the Talmud, the temple traveled and went from city to city with the leader of the generation. And wherever was the synagogue and study hall of the leader of the generation, that was the energy of the temple. So now that's 770, which is why personally for me is like no question. I walk in there and whoa, I feel it like so intently, which of course has a lot to do with background and learning and studying and living a certain life that like opens up your pores. So the more your pores are open, just like at a certain time you can be in Israel and not feel that at all, and then you go there and you feel it so intently because your pores are open to it. It was always there, but you weren't tuned in, or you weren't tuned in as much, almost like, as we can imagine, it says like when we have the complete revelation of Mashiach, and we're all going to be experiencing godliness, but every person is going to be able to absorb it as per the accumulation of study and commandments and merits and relationship to God that they accrued now. Almost as if you can envision a whole group of people in a museum. Well, we're all seeing the same things. But if you're not tuned in, don't have the background, don't have the appreciation, don't have the culture, can't compare it to anything, don't know the history, don't know the styles, you see it, it's nice. But you can't compare that to someone who majors in art, or at a concert. You can't compare appreciation to appreciation to appreciation, each person based on their knowledge and experience and skills, and similarly, those are metaphors. By the redemption, we're all going to be absorbing, not art, not music, we're all going to be absorbing God. God's going to be what's out there. And every single human being on the planet, Jew and non-Jew, every single human being going to want God and going to be absorbing God. But every one of us will be absorbing it differently. God's going to be appearing to all of us, but we'll all have a different ability. We'll all have different pores of sensitivity that are open to taking it in based on what we've done in our journey until that point, which I'm saying is sort of like one person going to Israel, one person going to Israel, or one person going to 770, one person going to 770. It's there. It's sort of like they say that someone could go into the temple and see God, and another person could go into the temple and see the most efficient, clean slaughterhouse in the world. It's not the most efficient, clean slaughterhouse. It's God's home. It's God's home if you see it or not. But fortunate to be able to go in and see that it's God's home. So Fruma asked, going back to Fruma, I didn't forget, her second half of her question or comment is, what we're saying, this movement that began in 1940 with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe coming to America and tremendously jumped in 1941 with the current Lubavitcher Rebbe coming to America and bringing all the spiritual energy to America and uplifting the lower hemisphere, and therefore uplifting the whole structure and the whole idea of now the time of Mashiach, through the Rebbe, this ultimate redemption for the Jewish people. And she said, how does that jive with the world seeming to be like falling apart morally, ethically, spiritually? What is going on? And how do you say then, all that we've experienced these past few years? I remember, I guess it was during Corona, my daughter, Musia, who now is 12, which means she was 10 then. I think my children were sort of maybe saying Ma, when do you remember this happening before? And I said, it never happened before. And then I think in connection with that conversation, maybe separately, Musia saying when I'm older, people are going to talk about it. And I'll say this as a 10-year-old saying, and I'll say I lived through it. And, when I'm talking to people, they won't know what the word, I don't remember which word she was, quarantine. I think it was probably quarantine. They won't know what quarantine means. But I know what quarantine means because I'm living through it. And it's very cute to hear a 10-year-old saying these ideas. But so we've lived through a lot over these past few years. And definitely, and we see a lot of breakdown. And from this question, I think, is very to the point in terms of how do we match this idea of since 1940 and then 1941 and 60 plus years of the Rebbe in America and bringing the divine presence to America and lifting up the bottom of the world spiritually, meaning lifting up the spiritual bottom of the world, but lifting up the whole world and the march toward redemption, and seeing how the Rebbe has impacted the globe, Jewish people, non-Jewish people, bringing everyone to this awareness of God. How does that match with this whole moral breakdown we see in the world around us? And I think the answer is more than one answer. It's a good question. One answer could be, as I was saying before, the pendulum concept. That as much as we see the expression of godliness to maintain our freedom of choice, there has to be the other end. But as the Rebbe says, but the other end really is a facade. It's a very corrupt facade. It's really not as appealing. Like in the 1950s, to convince secular people to send their children to a Jewish school was impossibly difficult. And nowadays, it's not so impossibly difficult because it's really easy to show why you wouldn't want your child in a public school in America. So it's, it's on the surface appealing, but the surface is very, very, very thinner than paper thin. Very bankrupt. The appeal is very bankrupt. The ugliness under that is so obvious. You don't have to be especially religious. Who was this? Oh, I was speaking to a therapist who happens to be religious. I mean, she is religious, and she was saying that when she speaks to her clients, I think we were somehow talking about devices, and she says when she speaks to her clients about, children on devices or social media or all these people watching porn, she says, I speak to them, I tell them, I'm not speaking to you as a religious person, I'm speaking to you as a therapist. She said, from a very secular perspective, all these stuff is so damaging. We don't need to go to religion to bring out the damages in any and all of these areas. So I think the secular world has seen and experienced enough to know how bankrupt that allure is. But that, if we look in the Talmud, when the Talmud gives signs of the coming of Mashiach, the Talmud gives both signs. The Talmud gives the positives, and the Talmud gives the negatives. The Talmud speaks a lot of breakdown of the world as signs. The signs of Mashiach coming, and it's those are signs? Yeah. Again, the pendulum. Another reason why the evil is so overt that has to do with the coming of Mashiach, as is explained in the end of Daniel, is that the evil's out there to be refined. Evil always exists. The evil you see today was very much in the Roman and Greek empires as well. But it's out there now so we can refine it. And that's what it says in the end of Daniel, that at the end of time, all the evil will be revealed to be and the language of Daniel, Yisparu v'Yislamnu, to be extracted, to be refined, to be purified. So there's a lot of bad stuff on so many levels that's exposed now, that was around but not exposed, and therefore couldn't be refined by being rejected and revealed for what it truly is. And now it's all out. And it's out, I'm saying, with all of its hollowness, that people can refine it by rejecting it. So they actually really, yes, and if you look in the Talmud, it's both the sign. Now, again, it's never the road the Lubavitcher Rebbe goes in talking about Mashiach. Lubavitcher Rebbe is absolutely consistent. Always, always, always. The Rebbe looks at everyone with the most positive eye. The Rebbe looks at everything with the most positive eye. And when the Rebbe's talking about Mashiach, it's with the most positive eye. So the Rebbe's signs for Mashiach are only the positive ones. Only adding in goodness, adding in kindness, the world becoming a moral place, the world helping each other, cessation of war, bounty, all of the good. Those are the Rebbe's, the high road of Mashiach. And it's true. But at the same time, in the Talmud, it speaks of the low road. And I think those are both roads. I think the low roads is a road to Mashiach, and the high road is a road to Mashiach, and they're happening concurrently. And we can sort of choose which road we want to go on. Do we want to say, yes, Mashiach's coming because the world is a so much better place than it ever was before, and so much more moving toward an awareness of God than it ever was before? Or do we want to say Mashiach's coming because the world is falling apart? So, it's got to be Mashiach when we see this happening in the world. Both true. We can battle both, or we can pick which one we want to focus on.
Mrs. Turn, sorry. People are like accepting these like mentally ill things that are going on. They're like, it happened to be today, somebody I spoke with. She's not religious, but still, like, it shouldn't be even like a thing. Her son like saw her putting on makeup, so she sent me a picture. She thought I would think it's cute, which I thought was disgusting. I like deleted right away. I was like, I don't want to see this. She put like a full face makeup on a 5-year-old boy. Like, that's sick. Like, what is going on through your head that you think, oh, this is so accepting, this is what we need to be doing? No, you're like damaging your child. You're gonna make him mentally ill, God forbid. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's so sickening that people are like, yeah, like, be a woman, and like all these, like, it's really, people are really like taking it in and being like, yeah, this is what the new normal is. It's not normal. It's so sad.
So I'm saying that's another sign of the coming of Mashiach. They're both signs of the coming of Mashiach. The good is a sign of the coming of Mashiach, and the corruption is a sign of the coming of Mashiach. And I'm saying, if you look in the Talmud, you see both signs. And it's like Mashiach has to come because look at how everything's breaking down. Mashiach has to come because look at how everything is moving forward. They're both true. They're both true. And again, it's not like I'm being schizophrenic here. That's how the Talmud discusses the coming of Mashiach in both ways. In both ways. And, and some like really scary signs just to make us perhaps be vulnerable to God and recognize we don't control our lives and only God does, and turn to Him. And that's another road in the coming of Mashiach. There are a lot of roads. They all are potentially there. And the question is, what are we going to focus on? So perhaps if we paint it as like, okay, now I really know Mashiach's coming, we can give an up twist to something that otherwise would be incredibly painful. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Sorry, I went back. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about 770. We're talking about the good and bad in this world, signs of the coming of Mashiach. Anyone else have thoughts on this? Well, thank you so much for joining. So nice how many people joined. It's so nice how many people shared. And I think that a lot of people that didn't share also had thoughts that they were thinking about this subject. And in your mind, you were sharing, you were processing, you were digesting. So this was a Hasidic gathering. as we say, a Vibranian. When people share and people process and people take something from it. So it's a very special day, a lot of energy, especially energy for us people in America, a lot of energy, a lot of Rebbe energy shining, a lot of Rebbe lifting up the world energy shining. So it's a wonderful time to introspect ourselves and take a step forward, grateful to be in the place, not like, imagine the craziness of being in Russia and finding God, or the pendulum in Israel and finding God. As Manufa said, it's also a journey finding God in America. She's absolutely right. And for us to take advantage of where we are. And actually, the city has a lot to do with the Rebbe. The previous Rebbe visited here twice. So there's a lot of Rebbe energy in Chicago. So really taking advantage and taking a step forward to God, taking a step forward to Mashiach, saying, yes, we are partners with the process. We're not just the passive masses that are going to be drawn in. We are partners with the process. So that's so nice. And Miriam just told me her mother's birthday is today. So your mother definitely was born on a day of enormous spiritual energy. And that should help her and help her children. A birthday is a very special day. You could turn to someone on their birthday and ask for a blessing.
But she was born before this happened in 1926 on this day.
Does not make a difference. A spiritual day has that energy before, after, and during. There's no day is random. It's not that the day became special in 1941. The day always was special. That's why it happened. It's like I was just curious. I was looking at different points in the Holocaust. Obviously only knowing the secular dates, and I looked them up for the Jewish dates. I looked up two things, and both things I saw that it was a spiritual date. Two things I looked up were, and they're both horrible things, but they're very intense things, and I knew they were part of this whole God's plan movement. One was, I forget what they call it, but when Hitler met and they devised they officially, legally came up with the final solution. And the other day was the invasion of Russia. I looked at both, like what was the Jewish date. And I believe the day of, I forget what it was called, I used to know, when they met, when Hitler and his elite commanders met and they legally went through the final solution, mapped it all out. It was connected to the 19th of Kislev. It was the eve of the 19th of Kislev, which is an enormously spiritual day on the calendar, one of the most spiritual days. And the day of the invasion of Russia, I believe, was today, the 28th of Sivan, in 1941, I believe. And it was very strong to me, that concept. And of course, spiritually, both, of course, that opened up millions of Jews in Russia, the Ukraine, and Russia, being massacred by the Germans. It also, in a physical way, opened up the fall of the German Reich. I thought it was very, very interesting that it was on such a spiritual day, because the day, or just like we're coming up to the day of the 3rd of Tammuz, and the 3rd of Tammuz in biblical times is the day when Yehoshua stopped the sun in Givon. And it was a day when thousands of years later, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was freed from his incarceration. And the Rebbe shows the connection of those two events and why they both happened on the same day. So the day is a day is a day, and because that's the day, that's why things happen. So it was before 1941. We just didn't know about it before then. But within a lot of energy. 28, koach, strength. We're women, so we're very strong. I was explaining to someone today how women are the strong ones. People have this misunderstanding and think men are strong. No, men are like, the strong ones are the women. Spiritually, Kabbalistically, women are strength. So we're the strength on this very strong day. And we're in America. So we're American strength, which is Rebbe's strength, which is a strength that's taking over the whole world. And the Rebbe's overtly probably the first Jewish leader ever that overtly is impacting not only world Jewry, but non-Jews. And overtly trying to bring non-Jews closer to God, which is, of course, the role of the Redeemer, Mashiach. So we live in a very special time, and we're very special people in this very special time. So it's a good day to take a step forward and a step closer, to open up our pores more to what's happening around us. Thank you so much for joining. I so appreciate everyone's input. So appreciate it. It's what makes these things special. Thank you so much for joining, and we should really have a very high energy, positive energy, like we started off with, stories like Rivka's and Orly's, that type of week, where we see the hand of God, even in the things that like don't feel so nice and warm, and we should see that overt as we get closer and closer to redemption. We should see in more and more obvious ways. The veils are very thin now. And we should see God's hand and God's beneficent, loving hand in all the areas of our life. Thank you so much for joining.